The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Tom Lane, DM2 Software's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. I would like to welcome everyone to today's Major Oil Lubricants Interfaces webinar. Before I introduce today's presenter, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Because of the number of attendees we have on today's webinar, everyone's phones will stay on mute. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the question window that you see on the lower right of your screen. We'll try to answer everyone's questions at the end of the webinar. If we're unable to get to any questions, we'll follow up with each of you individually after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. As soon as the recording is available, we'll post it on our website and on our YouTube channel, and I'll send you an email to let you know when they're available. On that note, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Helen Thaler, Professional Service Consultant for DM2, to give you an overview of our major oil lubricant interfaces. Take it away, Helen.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Assisting me in the presentation today will be our newest team member, Laurel Stover. Laurel was a power user of DM2 for many, many years and worked in a company where they did have the ConocoPhillips and the Chevron interfaces, so she's going to be able to give us some insight. So what we're going to cover today is we're covering the major oil lubricants, and I have an agenda. Make sure I can move my slide. I was able to move it a minute ago. There we go. So what we're going to look at today on the agenda is, first of all, we're going to define what are interfaces, what kind of activities are available for the different vendors. I'm going to demonstrate to you the interface setups, and I'm going to demonstrate the processing and show you the reports and imports. So at this point, it's kind of going to give you an end view of where we're going to. Then we're going to drill down into what does it take to get this going? What does it take to set it up? Where's the data coming from, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So the four vendors that we're going to look at today, so the first question is, what are vendor interfaces? Our four vendors that we have available are Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and Shell. Shell is by invitation only, and I'm going to say that a lot of times. Okay, and I'll explain that in a bit. So first of all, what are vendor interfaces? And a vendor interface, an interface to anything, is programming that allows the exchange of information electronically. I've got that in big purple because that's one of my favorite colors. And I'm going to repeat it again, and there's a lot of benefits to exchanging information electronically. The things that you can do in the interfaces is that you can order product through the purchase order module. You can receive your purchase order invoices. You can receive your orders from national accounts originating from the vendor websites. You can initiate and process orders for national accounts, which are buybacks, from your own. So when you're having contact with the customer and they're calling you to order product, even though they're a buyback and you're not really selling to them, you're selling to the vendor, you can still initiate and process the order. Some of the interfaces allow you to verify the credit for national accounts, make sure that it's okay to deliver to them. You can process your supplemental allowances. Supplemental allowances are rebates that you get for selling to certain people certain products, but you do actually sell to them and collect from the end user as opposed to a buyback where you're collecting from the vendor. You can also receive your credit memos, your payment electronically for the buybacks. Let's see my next page. There we go. So why use the interfaces? Why not just put it all in DM2 and then turn around and put it in the vendor's site? Well, it's because it allows the exchange of information electronically. You're going to avoid a lot of duplication of effort if you don't have to put it in twice. virtually eliminates any discrepancy in the data between DM2 and the vendor because you're only putting it in once and you're sending it to the vendor. Okay, that's kind of critical. You're going to automate transmission of completed sales order invoices to the vendors. The three vendor interfaces that are available to everybody, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and ExxonMobil, are based on a batch basis where you do your processing and you create a file that has all of the buybacks for the certain period or all of the supplemental allowances, and you send that up in a batch. The Shell interface is every single order that you put in goes through the process, and that's one of the reasons that it's by invitation only. You can also automate transmission of your purchase orders to your vendor, so you don't have to print it out and send it in or fax it or go onto their website and order it. You order it on yours, you know what you ordered, you send it on up to them. One of the real benefits of doing the electronic transmission is that you're going to get faster turnaround time, both on placing your orders and on getting your buybacks processed by the vendor. So you're going to get paid faster. It improves your cash flow. And the second, one of the second major benefits of it is that you're less likely to be audited by the vendor if it's all electronic. If you're doing it manually, your opportunity to be audited by the vendor and have to spend the time going back and proving everything is going to increase. So these are just a few of the really good reasons to allow the exchange of information electronically. This is a grid that I put together that shows the processes that are available and each of the vendors and what they have. So you can buy product. Pegmost, we don't currently have a DM2 interface to it. That doesn't mean that it can't be done. We just don't currently have it. But ConocoPhillips, we do. Shell does by invitation, and Chevron doesn't. Everybody lets you upload your buybacks, sales order invoices. Okay. We're currently working on a project, hoping to work on a project with Pegmost to initiate the ability to download this customer-originated, they call them customer POs, NAPOs, National Accounts Purchase Orders, so that you can download an order that the customer goes and puts on the vendor's website. Okay. Receiving cash back for your buybacks, Pegmost is the only one that has it at this time. ConocoPhillips is the only vendor that we work with that currently has a supplemental allowances upload. The method that we transmit the file varies. ConocoPhillips, you can either send it via the FTP or email, and this is wonderful for testing. This is incredible for testing, okay? Both Pegmost and Chevron generates a batch file. It writes to a specific place on your server, and then you send that externally, uploading it into their system. And Shell is FTP only, and it's every single record. Okay. It's kind of odd not being able to hear any feedback, so if I'm just talking to the air, I don't know it.
You're doing fine, Helen. This is Tom.
Okay. Okay. So again, I'm giving you the end view first, and then we're going to drill down to what goes into all these screens. So each of the vendors has there's a vendor interface option set up. So this is what ConocoPhillips looks like. Key information. What's my vendor number for ConocoPhillips? You're only going to have one vendor for your lubricant vendor for each vendor. Okay, you're not going to have 3 or 4. These are some default values. This is where you place your distributor account number. That's your magic number that they know you by. This is where you place the warehouse number and the plant. These are default values. You can change them as you are submitting purchase orders. Okay. The brands, there's 5 or 6 different brands for Conoco. Conoco Kendall, Honda, 76 or 66. So different brands. This is just a default. Each customer is set up by the brand, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Conoco likes you to say what the Incoterms terms in are. The mode of transportation, your packaging bulk. There's bulk and lubes, and I'm going to show you in purchase order how that comes into play. And then who's hauling the product for you. With ConocoPhillips, when you, like I said, you have the option to either email files or FTP them. When we're in testing mode, we set it to email, and we just send them all to Paul because, you know, Paul likes to go through this stuff. But you can set this up, and if you click on the email setup, it allows you to set up who you're sending it to. And the FTP server information is, once you're up and going, then you set this up, and this feeds the information to ConocoPhillips FTP server. The other two windows here are the buyback customers and the supplemental allowances, because ConocoPhillips has both buyback and supplemental allowance interface. We need to populate these. So I'm still trying to figure out. There. So this is what the ConocoPhillips buyback customers look like. It's a little ugly. It's not nearly so ugly when you're looking at it on the screen. It's just the way my picture turned out. You have a customer number. You have their ship to. You have the brand that's associated with that customer number. You have your account number. So if you have a different account number, I'm sorry, you have the customer's account number. So this is by ship to. And then you have the warehouse. So buybacks, you have two options with your buyback customers. The normal standard method is that you have one buyback customer with a whole bunch of ship tos. And each of those ship tos represents an actual national account with all of their delivery information, their terms, anything that's in there. Okay, not terms, but customer types. And that's really useful information for tracking what kind of products you're selling to who. Even though you're actually selling it to the vendor, you still want to know the national accounts that are buying your products. So the standard is to only have one account. However, I have yet to find a client that actually wants to do standard. This is an example where you have separate accounts receivable accounts with multiple ship tos for each of the brands. So you can, depending on how ConocoPhillips sends you your receipts, whether or not they do it in a batch or not, you can still really isolate the sales and activity that's associated with the individual brands within the ConocoPhillips suite of products. Okay. This is just a nice little grid window. It's a lot nicer than it used to be. This is all in the 4.5 install. The product is available at 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. So if you're currently running 4.3 or 4.4 and you don't have this, it looks a little different, but it's got the same information. Okay. This is the ConocoPhillips supplemental allowances. Supplemental allowances are real customers, not national accounts. So we have some real customers down here. This is some old data. This is my good data. What ship to there is, because a real customer obviously can have multiple locations that you might ship lubricant products to. The item code. Item code, this is the inventory item code, and it is related to a ConocoPhillips product code, and we're going to see that when we get into the data setups. ConocoPhillips uses a group code, a location, and a brand. These are critical pieces of information that they want you to include in your order information. And I just made these up, but they'll provide you with that. So it's really simple. You're just, plugging along, and when you're putting your accounts in, you're just account number, ship to. You can drop down and select the item code. And you can use your ALE lookups to minimize the amount of information on your drop-down to only include Conoco products. And you can, and then you enter this information. When I say enter, I don't always mean enter, okay? Entering is great if you don't have a lot of records. Imports are great if you have a lot of records. You have to know how to enter anything before you can know how to import it. We do have imports available for the not for the supplemental allowances. The buybacks typically we don't because there's not a lot of customers, but your ship-tos can be imported. On the imports for the supplemental allowances, at 4.3 and 4.4, this is something that is available, but it does have to be done by a DM2 consultant. At 4.5, they've expanded the files, broke them all apart, and we're confident that we're going to have user interface, the ability to have the user do the imports. As with any import that you ever do to a DM2 file, you need to be talking to a consultant and making sure that you're getting the data right and testing it in a test company first. We will give you the gun. We will show you how to point it, but we will not pull the trigger. Okay. This is what the ExxonMobil vendor interface looks like. It's very similar. So ExxonMobil doesn't have supplemental allowances, but they have a buyback customer. Again, we identify the vendor. With ExxonMobil, PEGMOST, there's a clearing account that has a bank account because ExxonMobil has the ability to process the payments that you receive from them for your buyback customers. ExxonMobil really gets really excited about warehouses. They have their own warehouse codes, and you need to cross-reference them, and so that's what that little button does. Okay, so if I click on the buyback customer button, it looks like this. Here's my buyback. Here's my ship to. This is my distributor number. This is their number. PEGMOST requires a purchase order number on every invoice, so we've been so nice as to give you a default purchase order number here. If there's not something here when you process the sales order invoice and you try to send it to PEGMOST, it won't let you. It'll let you know, I need a purchase order number. This is the cross-reference for the warehouse code. This is the warehouse code, what you call it in DM2. This is what PEGMOST wants you to call it. Okay. All of this information is used to generate a file that meets ExxonMobil's specifications for format and content. Chevron looks very, very similar. Buyback customers. They have sales only. They have transaction types of sales, product returns, purchasing card sale, and purchasing card return. And I believe that these are some gift card type of things. Chevron also had a need for you to be able to add additional fees onto the buybacks. And so this is where you're allowed to set those up so that it automatically generates those when it's appropriate. Okay. The buyback customer looks very similar. Okay, there's no PO because Chevron doesn't require it. Customers ship to what their account number is. Okay, so we've defined what interfaces do. They allow the electronic exchange of information. We've talked about what activities are available for each vendor. And I've shown you what the setups look like. So now we're going to look at interface processing. When I enter a purchase order, I just go into normal purchase order entry. And if the vendor matches the vendor that you've set up in your options, this is my Conoco vendor, down here in the lower left, it's actually the right corner, cross that out, there's a little button that says this is my Conoco and here's my supplier information. So when you're doing your purchase orders, the one thing that will drive you absolutely crazy is that they will not show up in the upload file until they've been printed. You're required to enter your purchase order, and this will pop up and this will be populated, and then you need to print it before it's going to be able to be transmitted to ConocoPhillips. I think the idea is that they want you to look at what you're sending before you send it. Concept. Okay. ConocoPhillips also requires that you submit a separate purchase order. So this is the information that's in the supplier. When I click on the supplier information, it comes up with the information that was in the defaults that we saw before. So if 90% of the time your packaging is lubes, you might want to set that to lubes as the default. Drop down here and it'll allow you to select it. You can make the changes to who's carrying it, and you can make the changes to your brand. This is at the individual purchase order level. So processing sales order invoices for buybacks and supplemental allowances. You enter your invoices normally. Buybacks are sold to the buyback customer to Conoco, whereas supplemental allowances are sold to the actual customers. If you don't have a customer set up as a buyback because it's new and you haven't gone in and set them up, you can add them on the fly. And anytime you do this, the first time you do it, add it on the fly and then go set them up. Okay? So when I go into sales order entry and I enter my product and I have my customer and everything, if they're already set up as, if it's a buyback customer, this is a supplemental because it's not the, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is a supplemental allowance. So if they're already set up as a supplemental allowance, you can drop down here. There is no supplier information. For a buyback, it's going to say ConocoPhillips, and it's going to have all of that information in there. Okay. So this is buyback details. I click on this. I drop down. I say I want it to be a Conoco buyback, and I go ahead and put the information in there. Oops, sorry. Because, of course, the customer account number and the customer ship to number is your number, but the actually this information here is your customers and what brand they have. So you need to provide this information when it's the buyback. So if you don't have your things set up, or if you have old sales orders already in the system at the time that you turn your ConocoPhillips on, you can go in there and make them buybacks. When you're ready to do your data upload, you go to a place called Data Upload. It's in the Interfaces, Petroleum Interfaces menu. There's 3 different types of uploads you can do. You can do everything, which will include buybacks, both purchases and sales. You can do just sales order, which includes buybacks and supplemental allowances, or you can just look at your purchase orders. Here's a little legend of what these mean. This is a buyback. It needs information. It's not ready to go. This is a supplemental allowance that's ready to go. It's got the big green check mark. Here's a purchase order and a buyback that are also ready to go. They got the big green check mark. When you have multiple items, so you see this purchase order here is in process, and you see that you have the individual items and how many you're buying, and what their unit of measure is, and how many you're buying. Okay? So each item is going to have, so if you have a supplemental allowance that has 3 different items on it, there will be 3 records for that same supplemental allowance. Let you look at the whole order before you send it. Okay? If you want to put something on hold, you just double click on it and it puts the big red X and it won't send it. So quiz question. And I know you can't raise your hands, but you could write this little note down. Of this list, if I just hit send right now, what would go? Okay, the answer is these 3. If I wanted to know what information was required on this one, I would double click on it and it would come up and give me the information. Okay, these little buttons down on the bottom, so you can send the things. you can look at history. You can go back and say, what did I send last week? By golly, I thought for sure I had sent that in last week. What did I send last week? And you can go look at the history on it right from this upload screen. Purging. I do encourage people to purge their data after a realistic amount of time. Doesn't have to be 30 days, doesn't have to be 6 months, but try to avoid having multiple years of data in here because it's just going to get bigger and bigger and slower and slower. Okay. Another really key icon on this screen is this little plus button. Okay. So updating information in the upload screen. Here's my buddy that's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1692. So I'm looking at my yellow. I'm looking at my needs information. It says I need information. Okay. I need the customer account and the ship to. Adding items. The plus button allows you to add items to the ConocoPhillips upload file. So you can click on that pop-up button, and you can add a purchase order that's there in the process. You know, you thought you had it, maybe you didn't print it. It's only going to be available if it's been printed. If you want to look at it, you can add it here. You can add a buyback invoice. Current invoice means it's been invoiced by sales order, but it hasn't been paid. A history invoice is a paid buyback invoice. Same thing with the supplementals. Current means I've been invoiced, but I haven't been paid, and paid has been invoiced and moved off to the history files, just like you'd see in normal AR. Chevron data looks almost exactly the same. Fortunately, they did actually put the right total so you'll know which vendor you're in. When I click on this and I click the send button, it says you are about to send 3 items to Chevron. Do you want to proceed? So for ConocoPhillips, where it's going to an FTP site, you say yes, it goes to the FTP site. For Chevron, where it's just writing to a file, it's going to go out and generate the file, and you have to manually send that file. Good, I'm about halfway through. I'm doing great. ExxonMobil looks the same. Okay. Receipt of payments for buybacks. PEGMOS, ExxonMobil is the only one that we currently have this functionality in that's available to everybody. And you get a file from ExxonMobil that contains the information that's necessary to match up your buyback payments to the PEGMOS sales order invoices that you sent on up. So when you're testing, when you're implementing, we don't get to this until after you've been sending things up because we got to have real data, real numbers to match. Trying to create those files manually is just asking for, it's a time waster. It's not worth doing. You wait until you got real data, and then we can test it. When it's imported, a cash receipt, an accounts receivable cash receipt is created for the invoice so it can be applied and the payment can be paid off. And a credit accounts payable invoice is created so that you can use those credits against your ExxonMobil liability. Okay. Standard reports. There's 3 supplemental allowance reports. It's supplemental allowance by customer, item, and vendor. Okay. This is what it looks like. Who's my customer? What was my invoice date? What's my invoice number? How many? How much? What's my rebate? And how much am I expecting back for this customer? Okay. And so this is run, this one is by item. So I said for this item, what have I got? You can also run it by the customer or by the vendor. And there's lots of different sort options on it. Okay. Additionally, the rebate data is available at the line item level so you can create crystal reports. Okay, where's my crystal report? Here it is. You can build your own, okay? So however you want to look at it, you can create this. It can be reported on the buyback customers. It can also be reported on the supplemental allowance customers. this was just a quick and dirty report of my buyback customer to find out what they were buying. And I created this in Crystal in a little over 20 minutes. So the information's all there. That's always the challenge with writing your own reports is the information there, and where is it, knowing where to get it. And the good news is the information is there, and I know where to get it. And a number of other professional service consultants will also be able to tell you where you can get that information. Okay. Imports and exports. The product, your vendors have a product number, and that's called the vendor product, and we put it in the vendor item. Again, standard data that we're going to get to here in a few minutes. And it's really, really important to have that cross-referenced to your DM2 item. One of the challenges that some of our clients have faced that don't use these interfaces or don't have them set up is that, surprise, the vendor will on occasion change their product number. You don't want to change your product number. You need your product number to remain the same, and there's a cross-reference to what does the vendor call it. So when the vendor changes it, you can just go change it in the cross-reference, and everything goes on as usual, and you can maintain your history of the activity that has happened with that specific product, who you've sold it to, how much. Okay. Once you have that product identifier cross-referenced between the vendor and the DM2, you can import vendor prices using Visual Integrator. Why might it be important to do that? Gee, well, when you sell buybacks, you're selling to that customer, you're selling to the vendor, based on the standard price that the vendor is going to pay you. You don't get to decide how much you're going to charge your customer. The vendor decides that. So it's really a great idea to be able to have that vendor's price in there, because that way when you process the sales order invoice at a given price, when the cash receipt comes in at that same price, it clears the invoice and everybody's happy. Okay. With customer rebates, can also be exported to spreadsheets to track receipts from the vendor for supplemental allowance payments. Again, because those rebate values are associated with every single line item of every single transaction. And that's part of what you see here. This is actually a buyback customer, but if it were a regular customer, this is still just an invoice. And here's my rebate amount. Don't have any on this one, but that's where it's at. So I can create a Crystal report that has things in the columns that I want, and I can use that to export out to a spreadsheet. So when I say customer can be exported, I'm talking write a Crystal report and export it to the data. PEGMOS, as I have mentioned, includes an import from ExxonMobil for the payment of buyback invoices. They're the only one at this time that we have an import for, with the exception of Shell, which is by invitation only. Okay, so we've talked about this. Now I want to talk about what it takes to implement this product. We have standard data. If you're thinking about buying this product, your standard data setups can be done before you ever pay the money, get it installed. Okay? There's programs. The programs are actually installed on your server using what we call the DM2 add-ons, and you'll get a new DM2 reg.dat registration key that allows you to use it. So you already have we put the programs on, and we give you the key, and you turn on the users, and bingo, you're going. So after you've got your data good and the programs have been installed, then you go in and you set up that interface-specific data that we talked about up here. Okay? And then you start processing in a test mode. Okay? We've already done this. So what's the standard data that has to be set up? AP vendors, inventory items, inventory vendor items. the units of measure, your AR customer, your AR shipped to, your inventory pricing, how am I going to price these customers, whether it's a buyback or a supplemental allowance customer, and any rebates. Okay. AP vendor looks pretty normal. The only thing that's different is that when you drop down here on the More button, I don't have it, but when you drop down on the More button, there's a little thing that says purchase address, that says where do I buy it from. And so when you buy from a vendor with multiple purchase address, what the vendor calls a plant, you need to set it up in here. Otherwise, it looks pretty much the same. Okay, inventory item setups. There is functionality in the DM2 system that is called Use Special Unit of Measure. And if you're not using special unit of measure for lubricant products, you're cheating yourself out of a huge amount of functionality in the DM2 system. When you use special unit of measure, and that button is clicked, your standard unit of measure is the pricing, how it's priced. Product is priced by gallon. But it comes in a case of 12, being 3 gallons. 12 quarts equals 3 gallons. So you buy it in a case and you sell it in a case and you count it in a case. But when you're pricing it, it's all based on the gallons. So before you even think about using the interface programs, we need to make sure that you're utilizing the special unit of measure handling, which should no longer be called special. It should now be called standard, and that you have your setups appropriate here. The other piece of information that's helpful on the item, it's not absolutely required but helpful, is that you set your primary vendor as the vendor that you're going to be interfacing with on this. Okay. There's a vendor item setup, and when you do this, it'll let you go here and it'll come in here and it'll automatically create it. Here's the vendor item setup. Okay. So I have my vendor number, PV, I know what that means, part something. Who's my vendor? The vendor item code. This is the information that is used to send, to properly identify this item in the buyback and the supplemental allowance file to send it to the vendor so that they know what it was you sold. So this number up here does not have to be the same. This is case 712-1003, and this is 107522. That's your vendor product number. For ConocoPhillips, this is the format when you are, for anything that's at 4.4 or below. At 4.5, they threw out this CS12, decided they didn't use it anymore. So if you're setting it up there, you don't put that in there. Okay. So where do I get this information and what do I do with it? Well, the vendors will provide you the data in various formats. ConocoPhillips is very good about providing a standard interface. It looks the same every time for every customer, okay? And so they provide that information. You can use Excel and Visual Integrated to create the cross-reference. I recommend that while you're doing this and you're identifying your cross-reference, what does my vendor call my inventory item, that you use either one of the inventory categories to store the pure product number, 107522. That's what allows us to cross-reference the product to the product and do the price imports. You can also, if you don't want to use your inventory categories and you're at a version that has custom office available in inventory, you can use a custom office UDF field to do this. I found this to be very helpful. I had one client that really, really, really wanted to have the vendor's product number on their sales order invoice. And we were able to accomplish that by putting it in the category and then including that into the sales order invoice presentation. We encourage you to create the spreadsheets. And again, at 4.4 and below, DM2 assistance is required to do the imports. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you're going to need some help with it. This is what the data looks like that you get from ConocoPhillips, and you know it's across the top. I transposed it here so we could look at a single product. So it has the client shipped to. That's what the customer number is for the client. It's got what division they're in. It has their name, they're sold to. So we have sold to, shipped to, their address, what warehouse they buy out of, and the name of it. The product code, so here's that one number, and then here's the product name. And one of the things that can be a challenge is that the only place that this 12 and 1 is all buried in this product name. And you see also that the brand is buried here in the product name, and brand is part of the key that you need to set up. The unit of measure here is their unit of measure. So this is what the data looks like, and you take this data and you massage it, manipulate it, and cross-reference it, and come up with a file that can then be imported for all of the products in the item vendor file. Okay. Units of measure, standard. You don't have to set up their units of measure. You just need to know what yours are and relate them to what theirs are. Again, at 456, they've taken our unit of measure out of the picture for the interface. And I'm sorry, my dogs are going nuts. I knew it would happen. But when you're talking about pricing and you're talking about placing the orders and the extension amounts and things, they have to tie together. Accounts receivable, customers and ship-tos. Here, Panda, come here. Go see Tilly.
At least you have an audience there, huh?
Yeah, I'm getting some reaction. Oh, sorry. Okay, so accounts receivable, customers, 2 seconds. They're adorable. Okay. Accounts receivable, customer ship-tos. Use one AR account for buybacks with a ship-to per delivery point. Use one per brand. On PegMost, you only want to use one AR account. My apologies. Okay, so PegMost using one AR account only. I believe that this requirement has gone away with the 456 changes, but the reason that it exists in the previous versions is so that you can get that buyback payment processed properly. The supplemental allowances are set up at the real customer level. Pricing can be at item customer level or at item and ship to level. So when you set up your accounts receivable customer and ship to, that's normal AR, drop down on your ship to. Might want to utilize the customer type for, am I a buyback, am I a supplemental allowance, you know. So customer type is the most available method of printing reports. It's one of the key indicators that we use for selection criteria, so I recommend using that. Item customer pricing. So when you do pricing, you set it up as a customer price schedule. Here's my buyback customer, and I can use all the ship tos, and this is general to specific. And so you can do a price discount amount, which is going to key off of the standard price, and that's the number that you got from Conoco. And if, in fact, there is tiered discounting, you can discount it, and it'll go with that. Sorry. Or it could just be all, 1 to 999, and there's no discount amount, no markup down, and it's going to price everybody at this. So general to specific means this is for everybody. But if you happen to have certain buyback locations that get a different price, you can set this up for everybody, and then you can set those individual buyback customers up with their own ship to code and make whatever adjustments you need to make in their pricing. Rebates for supplemental allowance customers when you have a customer price schedule. So here's my Lombardo Diamond Core Drilling. They're not the vendor. They are a real customer. Everywhere I sell to him, I get a rebate of 25 cents per gallon. That's my standard unit of measure on this product. And my pricing is I give them a dime off. So I give them a dime off of the vendor's price, the standard price, but I get a quarter back. So I'm really making 15 cents on this guy. Okay. So by having this flagged as yes, every time I do a sales order invoice for this product to this customer at all any of his ship tos, I'm going to have this 25-cent information stored with that transaction. So again, where do I get it? The vendors provide it. They send a spreadsheet of the customers and the products, because supplemental allowances are all about this customer can buy this product, and this is what I want you to call it when they do. Again, you can use Excel. You're encouraged to create your spreadsheets and do the data massaging, and DM2 will be happy to assist you in importing that information. Okay, we got through all the standard data. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we do the programs. But first, I'm just going to back up for a moment and tell you that if you're considering implementing this, the first thing to do, so that you don't get the program in there and have everybody thinking you're going to go live next week, is take a look. Let's take a look at your data. Find out what you've got. Here's an opportunity to clean it up. Here's an opportunity to make sure that here's an opportunity to standardize what I call things. So the programs are installed using the standard DM2 add-on functionality. You need a new registration key, which is the DM2 reg.dat, and you install it. You have to have administrator privileges to do it. It means, we get on the server with you, you give us privilege, you watch us do it. We put the new key in place, and then user roles are updated to allow access. So typically when we do an install of this nature, the only user role that gets access is the admin user, and then once it's up and going and you're happy, you add the other users to it. The interface-specific data that you'll need is ConocoPhillips. You need your FTP logins. For PEGMOST, there are certain specific folders that you set up, and we're going to talk about file management a little bit. Of course, the other interface-specific data that you need is what's my customer account numbers, what do my vendors call these customers. File management. A lot of the interface files end up getting dumped into the FT company folder. for PEGMOST actually has PEGMOST and a sales order invoice and a buyback folder, and then they have archives, and the files get written there. When you get ready to set it up, somebody, possibly me or Laurel, will talk to you about file management. It's a really good idea to keep those files that you sent to the vendor with a date on them someplace on your server where they're going to get backed up. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the Mass 90 folder, so that if you ever got to go back and say, yeah, I did send that to you and this is what it was, you've got it. Okay? But again, because we have the ability in the interface to look at history, you can see what the files are. That you can see what data was sent, but to actually have the physical file that was sent up to them can be very useful. We just don't want to, the files are named the same thing every day, and so you overwrite them, so you don't want to lose them, things like that. Let's see. What do we do when we begin processing? 8 minutes, I'm doing great. Okay, when we begin processing, the first thing we do is that we create a file that will clear everything that's out there that would need to be sent, and it gives you a clean starting point. We set up the email so that you can email the files to yourself and your DM2 consultant. We enter test sales orders and invoice them for buybacks. We do that for supplemental allowances. We look at the files, and at that point you're going to want to look at the standard reports to be able to, see if is this going to meet it or do I need something else. Once the vendors approve the format, then you can have normal processing. And as I mentioned, if you're going to do a buyback payment through PEGMOST, you need to get real data because it's tied to the invoices and receipts. And then this is a point too where any crystal reports that you might want can be written in a format that meets the client needs, specifically for the supplemental allowances if the standard reports don't meet your need. Okay, I'm at the end of my agenda. Tom?
All right, thank you, Helen. This is where we normally put in a plug for our next webinar. We'd like to invite you to attend our Internal Controls Early Warning Systems Part 1 webinar on Thursday, April 17th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 Central. Running that will be Professional Service Consultant Patty Hendrickson, and she'll walk you through some of the tools, processes, and best practices that we've developed to help you recognize and prevent problems before they get out of hand so you can focus on growing your business. I will be sending out that invitation as soon as this webinar is over. So you want to go ahead and mark your calendar for that. We'll look forward to having you join us next month on the 17th. And now we can open it up to any questions. It looks like we've got one question so far, so that means you did a good job explaining all of this, Helen. The first and only question we have at the moment is from Leanne over at Knox Nelson. She's asking specifically about the ExxonMobil PEGMOST interface. She's asking, can you tell what the payment dates are and what the post-buy dates are?
Oh, on the buyback, okay. So for the receipts that come in, the payment date is going to be the receipt date, the day that you receive the file. This is an example of where having the real data to look at is how we would test it. I'm going to say yes, and when you actually have a real file from PEGMOST, then we can look at it.
Okay, that's all the questions we have at the moment. I just want to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded or is being recorded. Once the recording is available, we'll post it up on our website and our YouTube channel. We will also post a copy of Helen's presentation that you can download off of our website. We should have that available by Monday. I'll send around a message to everybody to let you know that it's there. I know that's a lot of material to digest, so if you can think of any questions after the webinar or would like to find out anything more about today's topic, please feel free to email us at sales@dm2.com, and we'll be happy to follow up with each of you. I'd like to thank Helen and Laurel. Very nice job on the presentation. Some good feedback from the dogs there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was hard. I could hardly hear it on my end. I mean, I heard a little bit, so I don't think it was too bad for anybody. It was probably throwing you off more than anybody.
Yeah.
Let me check. Let me check just one last time to see if there's any questions. No, it looks like. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Then Leanne actually has a follow-up question. She's asking, what about pump-offs?
Pump-offs has come up. There is some provision for them. I worked with another client on this, and Leanne, you guys are still running 4.3, right? I guess maybe you can't answer that question, but I believe that, we came up with a way to deal with the pump-offs. They are recognized, and that's about all I can tell you right now. It's been probably 9 months since I worked with the person that had it, but it is something that is in the system and can be recognized.
Yeah, and there's a confirmation that, yes, they are running on 4.3.
Right.
All right. Well, like I said, after the webinar's over, if you can think of any other questions or would like to find out anything else about today's topic, feel free to email us at sales@dm2.com, and we'll coordinate with Helen or anyone else we need to get you the right answers there. Thanks again, Helen. Thanks, Laurel, for sitting in, giving some moral support there. And I would like to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to sit in on today's webinar and learn more about the major oil lubricants interfaces that DM2 has to offer. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you. Bye.